Hello there, and welcome back to Inside the Ball, episode number 58. I am your host, Ryan Smith, and my guest today here is from ESPN, also from the great state of North Carolina, area code 336, and North Carolina Central graduate as well. He is ESPN draft analyst Jordan Reid. Jordan, how's it going?
What's good, Ryan? Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure being here.
Absolutely. Let's go and just get right into it. Um, the Panthers, before we get there, just for anyone who just may not be as familiar with kind of what you do for ESPN, can you just lay out kind of what you do as a draft analyst, what that entails, and kind of your day to day
Oh man, how much time do we have? I could be here
there?
all day.
Short and answer.
So during the fall, pretty much I travel the country and I'm watching these players. Um, I live scout. So it's called live scouting. You actually go to these games, you see different college atmospheres, and you get to see these players up close. But prior to that point, all summer I spend studying or tape watching these guys and figuring out background information and figuring out who these guys are with their helmets off. Just because we can all watch film, we can see who these guys are, what they do well, what they don't do well on tape. So my objective during the summer is to just get background notes on these guys from a personality standpoint, and then also the upbringing as well, just so I can get notes that they or interesting notes that I should say that I find really interesting from their upbringing, maybe from high school or prior years with the transfer portal. There's guys that may have transferred one or two times or even three times nowadays. So during the fall, that's when I actually do live scouting. And then during the spring, that's when we'll get to what I call the meat and potatoes of the process, where we get into the all-star game circuit. And then also we get to the combine and then eventually the draft.
Yep. For those who just may not be familiar kind of with drafts and how they kind of work strengths and weaknesses, would you say this draft is one of the weaker ones, stronger ones, somewhere in between? And then from that, what is kind of the strongest positions in this draft and some of the weaker ones?
Well, this draft is much different than what we saw a year ago, just because I think it was, or I believe it was, a very quarterback-driven draft last year. This year's class, it isn't as strong at the top as far as with elite players. I believe there's only about three or four what I call blue collar or blue chip players, excuse me, blue
Yep.
chip players in this year's class, as
Yep.
opposed to last year. I mean, we had a litany of guys go inside the top 10 that I believe were those blue chip worthy types of players. But if you're looking to fill out your roster, I really like this draft class. So from picks maybe 15 through 75, you're probably going to get the same type of players that I believe can be those B level starters that maybe can fill out some depth on your roster initially. Initially that eventually could turn into starters on your roster. So there isn't a lot of high end or front line talent early on in this year's class. From about 15 to 75, though, there is a lot of depth in this year's class.
Yeah. All right. So let's get into the Carolina Panthers. This is inside the Panthers podcast. Panthers are number 8 in the draft. We'll get to maybe a trade down scenario later, but for now, if the Panthers were to stick at 8, you've got guys like Jalen Walker, Mikael Williams, Tetra McMillan from Arizona, and then obviously you've got other players that are talked about more in the team. Is number 8 too early for a guy like Tyler Warren, Mike Green, um, guys like that. So you can go through, kind of what you expect the Panthers to do at 8, but I just have one question for you regarding one player that I don't think is going to be there at 8, but if I tell me my pipe dream is maybe a reality. Derek Brown being healthy with Mason Graham would absolutely feed families in the state of North Carolina and Charlotte. I'm just going to say this right now. I love Mason Graham. I think he's a very good prospect next to Derek Brown. He could be elite, I think. So is there any way the Panthers could select Mason Graham at 8, or do you think he's going to be gone by then?
Well, if NFL teams were smart, he would be gone. But we've seen the opposite with a lot of NFL teams, and they tend to overthink some players. So never say never. But I'm with you. I think that would be the
Yeah,
home
yeah,
run selection for them if he's there at 8, just because what we've seen that really is a trend with Dan Morgan as a general manager so far is that he wants to build the team from the inside out. We saw the investment that he made last year in the offensive line, starting with Robert Hunt and then also Damian Lewis, spending a lot of money on those guys. So he is very invested in the trenches. Now, I believe this offseason is the defensive side of the ball's turn, just because They were bad on defense last year. There's no other way to describe it. So the best way to
Yep.
start it is building it from the inside out. You already have that centerpiece in Derek Brown, who's going to come back healthy next year, and you pair him with Mason Graham. Now you're talking about a firm foundation to build around that defense with those two guys locked inside. So I'm right there with you. I think Mason Graham would be that A+ home run selection. And if he is there at 8, I don't think they should spend more than a minute on the clock and not waste our time running the clock all the way down on draft day with the selection. So Graham will be a fantastic pick.
But if he wasn't there, guys that I mentioned like Ted McMillan, Mikael Williams, Jalen Walker, or even the Tyler Warren tight end at 8, is there a player that sticks out in your mind that would be good for them at 8?
Well, both of the Georgia guys do, in my honest opinion. And I'll start with Mikael Williams from Georgia. He's not as further along in his development as Jalen Walker as a pass rusher, but as a run defender, he's already ready from day one. And I was actually there for their game when they played against Clemson in week 1. And just to show you how respected I was of Mikael Williams, he actually was my top ranked player coming into the year, just because I thought he eventually was going to reach that sky high ceiling that a lot of people had on him coming into the year. And if you see this guy up close, I mean, he looks like he was made in a lab. The creative players that we used to make on Madden as defensive linemen, he is that
Yeah,
guy. He's going to have
yeah,
35 plus inch arms. He's going to be every bit of 6'5", 265 pounds. And the player that he reminds me of as a prospect is actually Danielle Hunter when he was coming out of LSU. They're very similar. And I know Danielle went in the 3rd round, but Danielle only had 4.5 sacks his final year at LSU. And the big question about him was, when was the light ever going to turn on for him as a pass rusher? Just because he was always a traits-based prospect, and you were always waiting for the pass rush regimen and the repertoire to eventually come along. But once he just gained more reps at it with the Minnesota Vikings and they brought him along slowly, the light eventually turned on for him. So I think Mikael Williams is a very similar prospect, and I would be comfortable taking him at 8 overall just because I think eventually that light is going to turn on for him. Now, on the opposite end, Jalen Walker, who is completely different. Um, he's a positionless prospect, and I know he's going to be working out with the linebackers at the combine, but I have him as a edge defender, but and it's going to break Panthers fans' hearts hearing me say this, but he reminds me a lot of Frankie Louvu. And I know he was on the roster last year, but just putting it in your mind the type of player that he can be on the next level. He reminds me a lot of Frankie Louvu, that ultimate chess piece of where you just move him all over the place, and whatever he's listed at on the depth chart, you don't really worry about just because he's going to be moving all over the place. And he's one player that you just allow him to play moving forward, and you just say, hey, just go wreck the game. And that's exactly what Georgia allowed him to do, and that's why he had a breakout season this past year.
yeah. And then do you think the Panthers would trade down if the opportunity presented itself, depending on how the board fell, or do you feel like BPA, best player available, just we need players, and players would be available at 8?
It just depends on who's there on the board, honestly, Ryan. Now, if somebody like a Mason Graham or a Micah Williams or Jalen Walker are there, I think you just stick and pick just because, I mean, they already have 9 picks already. So even though you have a lot of need in certain areas, I think 9 to 11 picks, I think that's probably the max you ever want to add to a roster.
Yeah,
So there's only so many guys that you can keep as well.
sure.
If a trade down scenario does present itself, of course, you want to do that. And Dan has shown that he's willing to trade down or even trade up, especially if there's a player on the board that they really
Sure.
do like. But,
Yeah,
if somebody is there that you like, I think you should go ahead and pick them. But if a team blows you away or sweeps you off your feet with a offer of them wanting to trade up, of course you entertain it.
yeah. What are some of the under the radar players for the Panthers in day 2, day 3? Some of the positions that I think the Panthers need. Receiver, tight end, defensive tackle, safety. And then some people are even saying kicker in the late round. So some of those who are some of those players that you're targeting for the Panthers day 2, day 3, and some of the positions of need in your mind?
Yeah, you know, uh, I think there's a lot of defensive ends that are going to fly off of the board in day 2, and there's 3 guys that I think are really that can be categorized into the same bucket. And I'll just name the 3. Landon Jackson out of Arkansas is one, and then the Ohio State defensive ends JT Tui Malowal, and then also Jack Sawyer. I think all 3 of those guys are those players that you say, hey, I know they're NFL ready right now. They're strong, excuse me. They're not overly great pass rushers consistently, but they're so mature and their strength levels are already NFL ready that they can go out there and they contribute in a rotation right away. So if the Panthers are looking for NFL ready players right now, Landon Jackson, JT Tuimoloau, and then also Jack Sawyer are definitely three names that I would keep an eye on. This wide receiver class is really interesting just because it's not a lot of, high end starters like we've seen in years past that are going to be top 10 to top 15 picks. So if the
Yeah.
Panthers do want to take somebody, second or third round, there's going to be a lot of guys that are available to them. Isaiah Bond out of Texas is one name I think they'll like a lot. Alec Ayo out of Stanford is another name that I could see them liking a lot. And then a couple of third or fourth round names. Ricky White out of UNLV is one name that I think they'll like quite a bit. And then also Jaden Higgins out of Iowa State, a player that I
He's
thought
on my list.
played
He's on
played
my list.
really
Yeah.
well. He played really well down at the Senior Bowl. So he's another name I think they'll like quite a bit too.
Yeah. A note on the kicker. I know kickers aren't very common. The Miami kicker, Andreas, um, he was working with, I believe, special team coach Darren Bates, or assistant special team coach
Hmm.
Darren Bates down at the Senior Bowl. So, and I noticed he spent a lot of time with him. So that could be a player to watch for the Panthers in late rounds, undrafted free agent. We'll see there. Not a question, just an observation that I knew
No, he
saw.
was actually impressive. He was at the
Um,
Shrine Bowl. He was at the Shrine Bowl when
Tribal,
I
yes,
was down there,
that's what I meant. Yeah, yeah, Tribal.
and I mean you could hear it sounded like thunder coming off of his foot when he was kicking those field goals. He caught a lot of people's eyes. So he definitely is one name I think has a chance to go probably in the sixth or seventh round.
Yeah. Three more. I'll go and get you out of here. What do you see from Bryce Young that makes you excited for 2025? And I guess beyond that, what do you want to see from him this coming season?
Well, I think it's just the continued growth with Bryce. And I think what happened with him is that things were just moving a little too fast initially, especially early on in the season. And he just needed an opportunity to just catch his breath, sit back and learn under Andy Dalton, who's an experienced veteran and a lot of things that he can learn from. But when he was able to sit back, learn, catch his breath, and then now just evaluate himself and what went wrong early on, now he was able to grade himself and really get better at those things. And I think it was a very humbling experience for him to go in and be the number two quarterback at times. So now once he went back out there, he understand those prior mistakes that he made, and he was able to execute and not make those same mistakes twice. So the continued growth with him, the killer instinct is what I loved about him, and something that we saw from him at Alabama as well. So I think just him being able to take better care of the football at times, that's something you always want to see with a quarterback, being more accurate at times as well, and then just continue to grow. Those are the three things that you really want to see, especially now. Year three is really that leap year that you love to see with those quarterbacks, and now it's time for him to make that huge leap and build off what we saw during those last few games that he ascended last year.
And the free agency class is coming up in about a month or so now. Not as strong this class from what I've seen. Obviously, Miles Garrett requested a trade recently. That's obviously the bell of the ball there. But assuming a guy like that doesn't come to Carolina, some of the names that I think that could help this team. Josh Sweat from the Eagles, Milton Williams from the Eagles, Poona Ford from the Chargers, Trayvon Morningwig, safety. We saw Jermaine Pratt just requested a trade from the Bengals, Tutu Atwell from the Rams, free agent there. So those are just some of the names that stuck out to me. But is there any guys that you think could help Carolina in free agency and as a whole for this coming season?
Yeah, I think those names you mentioned are really good, especially Sweat and then also Milton Williams as well. Both of those guys will be huge boost for the Carolina defensive line just because I think they just have such a lack of depth along the defensive line, but they
Correct.
need high-end starters at defensive tackle and also defensive end as well. So Sweat and Milton Williams would be great. It may be wishful thinking, but T. Higgins would be a great one, especially with the
Yeah,
homegrown
another
connections
time.
with him. But
Yeah,
I just think he may be
yeah,
outpriced for the Panthers' liking, especially with their need at receiver too. So
yeah.
T. Higgins would be great, but realistically, Sweat and then also Milton Williams would be great additions.
Yeah. Last one for you, and again, my guest today here on Inside the Vault in episode 58 has been Jordan Reid of ESPN, draft analyst, joining me here on Inside the Vault. Jordan, leaving the Panther fans kind of with some optimism heading into the offseason. What is one thing you're just looking forward to that Panther fans should be looking forward to in 2025? And I'll just ask my kind of bold prediction here. can they compete for a wild card spot next year with the dreadful NFC South and with enough players in free agency and hitting on enough draft picks like they did this past year? Can they compete for that wild card spot next year?
Yeah, I think they can. This definitely would be one team that I would not have a problem with buying stock in. And I know things look really rough early on, the earlier parts of the season, but you saw a young team get better as the season went along. You saw a lot of these young guys really grow up and develop, especially when Bryce started to get better as well. But something that you always want to see with a younger team is that you want to see young guys making plays as well. So you saw it with Bryce. Xavier Legette flashed at some moments, and I know he had some inconsistent moments and some drops here and there, but I thought he had some positive moments as well. Jatavian Sanders getting some positive moments from him as well. So seeing these young guys going out and making plays, you want to see your rookie class step up and do a lot of things as well. So continuing to build on the defense, I think that's going to be an essential part or focus point of Dan Morgan's offseason this year, just because they have so many needs on that side of the ball, but they have visible foundation pieces already in place, in my opinion. JC Horn, I think, is a great building block for them to have. I believe they're going to get that contract done eventually. I think he's worthy of a contract extension. He just needed to show that he was able to stay healthy, which he was able to do consecutively this year. Still needs to show that going forward. I think that's your only hangup about paying him, just because the ability has never been the question with him. They'll get Derek Brown back off of the season-ending injury that he had. And those are your two key pillar pieces. Now, they need to add some more pieces along the defensive line. I would like to see them get a true centerpiece at linebacker as well. They have a couple key free agents at that spot, too. So they have some pieces that they have to fill in. But as long as they're able to build on what they already have in place offensively, but make defense an essential building block this offseason, I'm buying stock in the Panthers, and I think they can compete for a wild card spot as early as next season, as long as Bryce Young continues to develop.
Well, you heard it here first. He is Jordan Reid of ESPN, NFL draft analyst. Jordan, all the best. Thank you for coming on Inside the Vault, and we'll talk to you down the road.
Absolutely. Thanks as always, Ryan. It's always a pleasure.
And that'll wrap up episode number 58 of Inside the Vault, Carolina Panthers podcast. Rate, review, and subscribe wherever you get your podcast. And we will see you